Well, let's see what we've got. Ooh. All right, I'm going to readjust the camera so you can see a little bit better. All right, well, this is looking pretty good. Pretty good. This settled a little bit more than I'd like. I wish I would have put something else in there, but that's okay. I remember I said I was worried about this gluing in, but did all right. Overall, I think that turned out pretty good. So I still have my hinges here. They look pretty strong. Everything is still flexible. Good. This all stayed down pretty well. Okay. But overall, turned out pretty good. So this is ready for painting. And this is ready for painting. So this is our spine piece. It's what our signatures will be sewn to. All right, so the next thing that we'll do is we will mix up some paint. So we want to use acrylic paint. We don't want to use watercolors, which is what these are. I have fantasies that someday I'll be a great watercolorist. Okay, let's decide on a color. So I got this navy. I'm feeling kind of like starting with a blue. But I need a lot of paint. This really takes a lot of paint to cover. So let's... That's an appetizing sound, isn't it? So I'm going to start with my blues and just see how much paint I have.
They'll say, no need to get out, just stay on a lovely holiday.
Alright, let's see what we've got with all these blues. I always mix... Now these are kind of watery. This is why these paints aren't great. I know they're cheap and they're tempting, but the problem with these is that they are cheaply made. And so they're, again, like that glue, they're a lot of water. So paint is nothing more than pigment, ground pigment, mixed with a vehicle of some sort with a binder to keep it together. It's essentially all paint is. And so what that vehicle is changes. So there's just thinners and other things in there. So this is an acrylic polymer, right? So it's mixed, so it's ground pigment mixed with an acrylic polymer and then water added to make it more spreadable. Oil paint is ground pigment mixed with oil, and then other oils used to make it more spreadable or more paintable. So this, because it's so watery, what you're paying for is you're paying for a whole lot of water and not very much pigment. Like paint out of the tube is more expensive. The quote-unquote artist paints are more expensive, but they're also going to be more buttery, like think a soft butter that's in your butter dish that's sitting on the counter. That's more like a spreadable butter. That's more what they're like. And so never use brushes for this, for mixing. This is a solid surface, a single surface. It's non-porous. And so as I mix, all of the pigment is getting mixed together. Where on a brush, right, this has a bunch of different surfaces, but they are porous. And so it's going to absorb a little bit of that paint. And if I were to use this to mix the paint up, I'm forcing the paint further and further up the bristles and into the ferrule. The only thing holding these bristles on is a little line of glue and then this ferrule kind of holding them in place. So if I force glue up into there, it's going to get up eventually underneath those bristles, and my bristles are going to start to come out into my paint. Trust me, there's nothing more infuriating than bristles in your paint. So that's the first reason. The second reason is once that paint gets into that ferrule, you're not ever going to get it out. And so then you're always going to have like little granules of other colors coming off into your paint, messing up your perfectly good paint. So take care of your brushes and they'll take care of you. You know, this stuff is expensive, right? These supplies are expensive. So don't make them any more expensive than they have to be. So I do kind of like that color. What happens if we added green to it? See if it changes much. I'm just looking for volume at this point, and then we can adjust the color if we decide we don't like it. But I'm really going for volume of paint. I don't hate that color. Like I said, it's a little too pure, so let's dirty this up a little bit. Let's add some of this brown to it. Oops, then I'll neutralize that color a little bit. I'm not doing a lot of brown, just a little bit. I don't want to change the color, I just want to change the value a little bit. So the value is how light or dark it is. And I also want to change the saturation a little bit. So the saturation is kind of how bright or how pure the color is. So I want to desaturate it a little bit. And I also want to bring down the value. So, alright, I don't hate that. I do want it more blue though. I think I've lost the blue and now I'm into green paint. So I don't want any yellow and I don't want any green. I don't want this going more towards green. And I've got a good amount of paint here. I think this will be enough to cover. I kind of like this color. It's kind of cool. What do you think? Kind of out of space, so I'd have to, I don't know, do something. So there is a science to mixing paint, but another problem with these paints is they're designer colors, so you're not working with kind of the classical pigments. So like they do weird things. Like I feel like that blue made this more green weirdly. I don't know. Maybe it's not shifting it much at all. So it doesn't always mix, because there's synthetic colors, they don't always mix how you predict that they would. Which is why I was like, oh, let's just see what happens when we mix these together. Let's see what they do. And that's not great when you're trying to paint something purposefully, when you're trying to, like, I'm just trying to use these colors up, and I'm pretty free with what color I end up with. But if I was trying to paint a portrait or, you know, an object or whatever, I would want to have more control over my pigmentation, and this would just frustrate me because there is very little to no control. I am not mad at that color. And if I decide I don't like it when it dries, I can always paint over it. It's acrylic paint. Should we add a little white to it? Should we tint this baby out? I don't know. I just lowered the value. I don't think I want to raise it again. I don't think I want a pastel of this color. I think that would be icky. I think I'm okay with this as it is, so I'm gonna move my toys out of the way. Alright. Got some water. We've got some paint. Got some paper towels. I think I have more wet wipes somewhere. Alright. Let's paint this sucker. So I'm gonna start with this brush. And when I get started painting, alright, so this is, the signatures are all going to be sewn to this, so you are going to see a little bit of this. I like to paint this the same color as the cover, so it kind of seems like it goes together. You could paint it any color you wanted to. You could even just leave it the fabric. You don't have to paint it at all. I like to paint it because it gives it a little bit more strength. But if you're using a fairly heavy fabric and you're happy with the color or the pattern that it is, I mean, you don't really have to do this step. But I'm doing it because that's the look I'm going for. So I'm just going to dip my brush. I always start with a damp brush. So I usually dip it a couple of times and blot it, just to kind of get it started, because a damp brush is going to absorb and handle the paint better than a dry brush will. And I'm just going to start, painting it. And usually when I'm doing this, I'm listening to a podcast or a YouTube channel, or I'll get absorbed in my own thoughts. Man, this is still really green. I am not going to like this paint when it dries, I don't think. We will see. But it's really green. There was a lot of yellow in that green. Because this is mostly blue. Just that yellow that's in that green has just dominated. So, different colors will have something called tinting strength. Different pigments, I should say. And this, something with a lot of tinting strength, will kind of dominate and take over another color. It's kind of like a schoolyard bully. And this green paint is really dominant. And I'm doing a fairly thin, even coat. Notice when I'm loading my brush up, I'm just grabbing a little bit of paint. This first, think in terms of several thin coats rather than one thick, gloppy coat. You want the paint to be even. You want it to be flexible, so big glops of paint will peel right off. And you want it to look like it's part of the book, like it was made to be that way, not like it's something sitting on top of the surface. So you want to give it a chance to kind of adhere. So the first coat, that's really what it does, is it just kind of gets down into the fibers and just kind of saturates the fibers. All right, so there's our first coat. I'm going to set this aside to make room for my book cover. All right. And we're just going to cover it with a coat of paint. And this is where any bubbles or anything that didn't get nailed down perfectly with the glue, this is where all that's going to come and show its ugly face. Anything that was sitting on your mat that got glued to the surface, that will become apparent. I try not to sweat it too much. There's always going to be a little bit of that. And a little bit of texture can add to the character of the book. They all end up with kind of their own character. Okay, now here's a pro tip. So I've got one coat going with it facing me this way. Turn it around, because guaranteed you've missed something going this way. Even if it's just this end of the spine, which hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So just, oh, there's a little spot. So just give yourself the best chance of getting all the nooks and crannies. This splat mat, by the way, this is 100% how I'm able to paint and do paper crafts in the same spot and sew in the same spot. Like, I make sure all of my painting is on this splat mat. You see how easy it is to clean up, or maybe I'll edit that out so you won't see, but it's very easy to clean up. It wipes clean with almost no effort. And that's just how I keep the rest of my area clean of paint, because paint gets everywhere, man. I remember when I was in undergrad, I walked into my painting studio one day just to pick up something I'd left behind. I didn't even walk like into the studio space. It was like right by the entryway into my studio space. No lie, I had paint on my coat. My brand new coat, oil paint. It was faux fur. So there I am on the floor of my studio, delicately combing through my faux fur coat that I couldn't afford to replace because I was a broke college art student. Hitting it with mineral spirits, hoping it wouldn't melt the polyester fibers of the fur. Fortunately, it did not, and I was able to save the coat. But bright red paint all over this buff colored faux fur coat. Get some little crusties coming up. This paint's getting kind of old, so it's got little crusties in it. Or maybe those came off my splat mat, who knows. You can see it's darkening up as it's drying. See, I like the wet color better. So paint always dries a shade or two darker than it looks wet. Always. So you have to compensate for that when you're trying to pick a color you like. And this is drying way darker. It's drying on almost a forest green. Like, look at how dark that's getting. I don't know how I have a lot of feelings about that, and none of them are good. Like I said, I have some artist paint I can add to our mix here. Now this paint is, because it's so watery, it is actually kind of good for this project, because you can see how it flows really well and gets into all of these little nooks and crannies. So I don't really mind it for painting these book covers. Although I've used artist paints too, and they work just fine. So again, because this is dimensional, I'm going to turn it around so I can make sure that I'm getting all the nooks and crannies from both sides. And you want to make sure you don't have any pooling paint, which I had a little bit of over here. I had a little too much paint. It was kind of pooling up. That'll create a little bubble. And it's just not cute.
ground running. No time to publicize that we're not just funny. That we're not just funny. Our love is easy lasting. Holidays so easy passing. Our love is easy lasting. Holidays so easy.
Okay. Brush health tip number 2 is never leave your brush just sitting in a cup of water. That's the quickest way, or paint thinner or anything. It's the quickest way to ruin your brushes and ruin the bristles on your brushes. So best practice is to, let me get all the paint off the handle as much as I can. So best practice is when you're done painting for the session, for the day, whatever, is to wipe the excess paint onto a napkin or a paper towel or whatever. Wipe off as much as you can. Then dip your brush into the clear water to clean it out. If you just dip it in there full of paint, then you're just gonna have to change your water that much more frequently. But if you wipe it off first and then dip into fresh water, then you're good to go. All right, so I got about as much off as I can. Now I'm going to take one of these wet wipes because I'm not done painting for the day. At least I don't think I am. I'm going to take one of these wet wipes and I'm just going to use it to wipe off my bristles again. And then I'm going to wrap my bristles in because this isn't actually clean yet. All I've done is dilute the paint. I've not actually washed off all of the paint. If I was done for the day, I would then take this brush to a sink and I would wash it under warm water, not hot, not cold, but warm water, like room temperature or warmer, or a little warmer, but not hot water. Wash it in warm water with a little bit of soap. Preferably I like Dawn dish detergent because that's got natural oils in it, moisturizers for your hands, and it's good for your bristles. You can get fancy soaps for cleaning your brushes. I've not ever, and I've got the same brushes I've had for some of them I've had for since 2007 or whatever, I've had forever. So you can, it's up to you, but these here are just craft brushes that I got for fairly cheap, so I'm not sweating it too much. But if you've got really expensive good brushes, for sure, take care of them. So I'm going to bring this back over. Sorry, my cat's making a bunch of noise. She is going to drive me crazy. All right. So I'm going to grab my blue. So look at the difference in how these paints are, though. Remember how the other ones just ran off? Right? That versus that. See the difference? Such a huge difference. So there's a lot more pigmentation even in these, and these are student grade. So student grade, what does that mean? Not as likely to be archival. So archival again means something will last up to 200 years. It's been tested at least to last up to 200 years. Not as likely to be color fast. That's not always true, but it's just less likely to be color fast. So that means keep it out of the light, because if it's in the light, it might change or not stay true to color. Sometimes that can mean, usually it's still going to be acid free. So in art or in student quality stuff, because it's still artist quality. Pigmentation. Oh, the pigmentation is going to be different. In student quality, for sure, it's going to be synthetic pigments, where in artist quality, it might be like ground pigments from like rocks. Like this is ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue comes from lapis lazuli, but guaranteed this is not ground up lapis lazuli. This is a synthetic version, where a more expensive tube of paint would be ground up from lapis lazuli. And you'll notice once you develop your eye for color, which it's kind of like developing your palette for wine. Once you develop your eye for color, you can tell the difference between the blues. And it might seem like, oh, well, you know, you have to have an eye for it to tell the difference. Like, no, it makes a difference. Like, you can tell it's a subtle difference, but it's there. And all those subtle differences from using better stuff can make a impact when taken together, when using paint in paintings. So I'm a big fan for get the best paint you can afford, get the best brushes you can afford if you're going to be a painter. I say this is a failed painter, so take that with a grain of salt. That's much better. But now I am feeling I want to bump the tint up a little bit, so I might throw a little white in there. My white's getting very farty. Getting low on white paint. And again, I'm running out of space, so I'm just going to have to be happy with whatever happens. This is a weird mix of things, isn't it?
You're so welcome. Your kindness really gives me a charge. Hope you had a good Thursday.
I didn't say anything that had anything to do with her. She's really got a mind of her own. I guess she felt she needed a compliment. And I didn't hear often enough to talk to her, I guess. Spend more time in my studio. My disembodied robot voice. Alright, well this is probably dull as dishwater. So I feel like I'm going to stop the video and then come back when I'm all painted up and you can see the finished color. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put on a video or a book or something to keep myself occupied. So that's where we started. This is where we've ended up. I like that a lot better. I will see you. For you, it'll be in a few minutes.
One eternity later.
Hello everybody, we are back and our book cover is painted. It's nice and dry. I've got 3 coats of the blue paint. There was one coat of that greenish paint underneath as well, but I covered that up with 3 more coats of paint, so it's pretty homogeneous. It's nice and dry. Let it dry overnight. The boards look pretty flat. There's a little bubbling there, but it's not a real thick board, so it's going to bend a little bit. So we have that part and we have that part, and you know, if you like the look of this, you could be done, right? This could be it, and you can move on to the next step. I, on the other hand, am not done. I am going to weather this a little bit more, so I'm not quite done with the paint, because I want this to look, right, like I went through all this trouble of putting these ridges on and building up this spine so it looks like a curved spine. I want it to look like an old book. And this was the oldest book I had to hand. It's not really that old. It's from 1902. But it's fairly worn. It's one of my favorite novels. You can get this on Audible, so I like it. It's a gothic romance novel, so it's fluff. It's not Shakespeare or anything, but it's a fun story. But anyway, it's an older book and it's been worn. And I'm using this as an example to show you the kind of wear marks that I'm going to try to mimic. And you want to look at where a book wears. So it wears along this ridge. And notice how that's lighter, considerably lighter. Color has kind of bleached out a little bit or worn away a little bit on those edges, on these edges, from being on a bookshelf, right? Being pulled off and on the bookshelf. The top has more wear. Look at how that's falling apart, because often we grab books like this off of bookshelves, right? The bottom has less wear. It's not as broken apart. There's wear on the corners, of course. I've thought about putting book corners on this or repairing it, but I don't know, there's something charming about an old book as well. But you can find older books like this in thrift stores and library sales. So, don't be afraid to have one or two in your collection for, this kind of reference. So you can kind of see the wear marks. Look at how dirty it is here, right? From people grabbing it and handling it, right? Think about how you hold a book, right? When you're reading it. Look how worn this book is. It just flies right open, lays nice and flat. It's this kind of open spine, right, that we're kind of mimicking with the binding that we're doing, by the way. So I want you to remember that properly bound hardcover books do that. They'll have an open spine, and we are mimicking that look with this binding. All right, so how do we mimic this look? Well, I'm not going to tear up my spine because this actually has weakened this spine, but I can put some material, some fabric and some things in here to kind of give it a kind of roughly look. Sometimes I'll put lace back here just to kind of allude to a kind of worn book. We don't have headbands on this book, so it wasn't a terribly fancy book or a fancily bound book. All right, here's a more recent book. This is from 1927 and has this decorative band up at the top that's called a headband. It's on the top and on the bottom, and it kind of finishes off the text block, protects the edges of the pages, helps support the book when it's sitting upright, that sort of thing. And you can see my old lavender and old lace does not have a headband at all. You can make headbands. Traditionally, they would be hand-tied onto really fancy leather-bound books. You can make your own. You can buy them places like Hollander's or probably even Amazon. We're gonna mimic that look too by using upholstery trim. Oh, notice how you can see these different ridges in these pages. Each grouping of pages, that's a signature. This is a this is a sewn book, and you can see the different signatures, the separation of the different signatures. It's a cool book. I bought this. It's a nature library. I bought this for the pictures. I thought I would take them out of this book and use them in my books, but like this book's almost 100 years old and it is in fantastic shape. Look at how beautiful that paper still is. I just don't have the heart to take apart a book that's not falling apart. And look at those gorgeous plates, gorgeous paintings, right? Probably originally watercolors. So this would have been a really expensive book 100 years ago to have these beautiful full color pictures in them. Lovely illustrations. So maybe someday I'll scan in the illustrations and use those. I don't know. Maybe someday, but I don't have it in me to take this lovely book apart. Okay, so that wear pattern. Isn't that funny? This book is only 20 years older than this one, right? This is 1927. It gets 25. This is 1902, right? But look at how much better condition. So this is, or better condition this one's in, but this was a reference book. So you would only pull this out every once in a while. Where this one, Lavender and Old Lace, that's a novel, right? So it would be handled a lot more. And so that's something to think about, right? When I said, if you like it like this, you could leave it like that. Because certainly old books older, again, 100 years isn't really that old for a book. But an older book, right, isn't... there are some that survive in pretty good condition, like the book cloth's in good shape. There's a little ding to this one corner. That's really it. Other than that, it's in pretty good shape. And that's probably from it dropping. It probably got dropped once. So again, I'm going to be painting this so that it'll look a little more worn like this is. And I've got my other one over here that I worked on before. And you can see that's what I've done with this one, right? So I've added paint to the edges, to the corners, just to kind of make it look worn and handled. And it also helps these shapes really pop. It really adds a lot of dimension. So you can see here, like maybe this didn't glue down as well, but I added that paint in and it makes that shape pop a little bit more, so it has more dimension to it. And you can really do this however you want. So I've got my white paint. I've got my brown paint to give me that kind of grungy color. And then I've got the blue color from my book. This is the color I painted the cover. And I'm going to use this to kind of tint the white color, because even as I'm looking at that purple book, I'm thinking, I really should have tinted that white, like it looks a little too stark to me. So I'm going to use this to tint this white down a little bit. So I'm just going to add some in right away. And then I'm going to add a bunch of white. Put a bunch in. And this white should have a lot of tinting strength to it, but... And against this blue, that's a pretty dark blue that I have there. I can go pretty dark with this and it's still going to look very pale next to the book. And this, it doesn't matter as much if you get it homogeneous. It's okay if it's a little streaky, because again, we're making the look of wear and dirt, and that doesn't happen regular or consistently or whatever. I'm gonna add a little brown to this, dirty it up. I might even add a little orange to this to neutralize it a little bit, but this is kind of an orangey brown, so it might do the trick for me. Neutralize this blue. I'm gonna add a little black. Now this will not need a lot. Just a drop. I don't want to turn it black. Just want to make it a little grayer. Again, to give it that kind of grungy look. Black paint is actually either, if it's kind of a traditional paint, it's actually either a very dark blue or a very dark green. And that's Mars black. So it's a very dark blue is actually how it's going to behave when it's mixed with stuff. So it's not going to interfere with our tone too much. If I was mixing it in with an orange, it would really dirty it up. But I'm mixing it up with a blue. And of course, it's a thin synthesized Mars black, but synthetic Mars black. But it's still going to be, because it's the student version. I think we are good. I don't have my splat mat down, do I? I am just mixing paint willy-nilly like a mad woman without any protection on. Always got to put your protection on. Although this isn't going to be as messy as the full painting was. And that might even still be a little too cheery of a color. So I know I have a lot of yellow in there because that green had a ton of yellow in it, if you remember correctly. So I'm going to try just a dot of red, because that red and that yellow make orange, and orange neutralizes blue. And this is still really Cinderella blue. Ooh, that's a lot. Red has a lot of tinting strength, so we'll have to be careful with that. Okay, this might be way too much red. It does not take much red to neutralize something. If it's too much, it'll start to go purple, although not likely, because it's a really warm red. But it could go a little purple on me. So last time I said, you know, you want to start with a little water on your brush so that it will absorb the paint better. This time I do not want that. This time I want actually kind of the opposite. I want to work with a mostly dry brush. And I'm going to be doing basically a dry brush technique. So I'm going to keep a paper towel handy so I can blot off the excess paint. And I'm just going to pick up a little bit. It's way too much. So I'm going to blot off the extra and wipe off quite a bit of it. And then, I mean, this is my sample. If I mess this up, it's okay, because we're not going to see a whole lot of this. And I'm just going to kind of, that's not too bad. And I'm going to do it in two directions, because again, I'm kind of mimicking that look of the weave of the fabric. Again, this is a very smooth, plain woven fabric, so it doesn't have a lot of texture. So I'm just going to imply some fabric texture. And now I start off kind of light with how much I'll put on, and then I can always add more later if I decide I want more later. And I've got my Lavender and Old Lace book around for me to kind of look at for inspiration. I've got other old books I can look at for inspiration. And if I don't like those real strong lines, I'll just come in a little harsher with the brush and just kind of blur them out a little bit. And then this is where this is going to hinge. So I'm just going to make that a crisp line. And remember, anywhere there was an edge, that's where I saw the lightest areas. So I'm just going to kind of hit that with my brush. Again, it's kind of a dry brush technique. I'm just hitting it kind of sparingly. And then out from there. Same thing over on this side. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. I could hit these edges if I wanted to, but this is going to be in the background, and I kind of want it to fall into the background. So I don't want to give this too much detail. So I think I'm going to call that good and kind of set it aside. And so like I said, this uses way less paint, and it's way less messy than yesterday's painting was. This will take a little bit more. And you can start wherever you want, but I'm going to start on the spine. So now I'm kind of warmed up. My brush is warmed up. So again, I'm just picking up a little color, blotting it off over here, and then kind of checking to see how much is left. So you probably can't even see what I'm doing. So this is the bottom, right? If this is the front, this is the bottom of the spine. And so that needs some color. And then I often do anything that kind of protrudes. And again, it kind of highlights them a little bit, so it really adds definition. And again, I may go back later and add more in. This is just the starting point. And I'm kind of coming in and shading into the corners a little bit. And like, you really can't mess this up. Like, if I do something I don't like, I have my original paint color, I can just paint over it. It's just paint. Right? You can do this. It's just paint. See how much more dimension that has? And this is a little textured just from the fabric wrinkling up a little bit, and that's okay. We saw how, you know, my other book was falling apart a little bit, and so it had some dings and bends in it. Highlight that stuff. So I'm going to come along the edge here and highlight this. This is the relaxing part for me. Normally I would have, like, again, some music or something going on in the background, and I would just be just vibing. Turn this around. It's easier when it's closer to me. And it's okay if some areas are lighter, some areas are a little darker. Books don't wear perfectly evenly. And turn it around so you can see it from different viewpoints. So you can decide if you like it. Do I have enough color? Do I need more? Do I need less? Painting is an additive and subtractive process. Add some in, take some out. And this is dry, so if I decided I didn't like that, right, I could go in with a wet rag and I could take it out. I could rub out parts that I didn't like, as long as this lighter color is still wet. So don't be afraid of this. Have fun with it. And you could do a different color, right? It doesn't have to be a lighter color, like I'm mimicking a worn book. But you could do purples, right, to kind of throw some shadows in. You could do, you know, I'm just doing two colors. Maybe I'll mix up a third color to show you what I mean. Like, I could mix another color that kind of goes a little bit more towards an ultramarine blue, and use that for the recessed parts to kind of throw those into deeper shadow. You know, to really give this thing 3-dimension. I've actually never done that before. That's a good idea. But I could do red on black, right? Like if I was doing like a magic book or a Halloween themed book. Actually, I'm thinking about doing that, doing a black cover and then doing the highlights in either a red or a yellow or somewhere in between. And maybe the shadows are more of a purple. So that's essentially the look we're going for, though. And you can do as much or as little of this as you want. You can make this as pronounced or as soft as you like. This is pretty soft. You saw on that purple book, it was a little bit more pronounced. This may end up more pronounced. You know, I'll kind of bring this back over and be like, do they kind of match, right? Like right now I might have more texture on this than I do on this. So maybe I'll come back in and add a little more texture. I really like that idea of adding in shadow colors. I wonder if this is gonna, if I'm gonna mess it up. Let's find out. Let's mess it up. So I really like that idea. Oof. Just dork. Alright. I'm gonna start in these deep shadows for this, because I think I'm going to use this very sparingly. Oh, that's cool, though. I mean, now I'm basically contouring, right?
To admit old habits, hard to forget. I spend the night alone, clear text from my phone, but hope you'll call me again. Oh, underneath the night sky, a world for you to hide, and I can never figure you out. When you step into the light, the shadows terrify the love I used to know.
And now is about the time when I start to think about, you know, what do I want to do on the spine? Do I want to do some gilding, or I could do some, oops, I've got some silver rub and buff I could do on the spine here. I could do trim. I might do silver rub and buff. That might be cool with this very cool, you'll pardon the expression, with this very cool blue that I've got going on. Alright, well, once I'm pretty happy with the outside, then I tackle the inside. You must not neglect the inside. That will also be subject to wear and tear. And again, think about how books wear, and where do they wear. So hinges, edges, particularly the top and bottom. I really like that. I like it a lot. Does this need more? Maybe I'm gonna leave that alone for right now. I'll again cover these up with plastic so that they will last the night. So if I decide they want more tomorrow, well, actually Sunday, this is Friday, I have a wedding reception tomorrow, and then tomorrow night I have an online chat that I do. Shout out to everybody that's in the online chat. Of my patrons. That looks pretty good. Again, they still need to be rinsed, but they need to be washed out, but they still look pretty good. Okay, next thing is of this ink. Because here's the thing. Like, we've done all the lightening and some darkening and stuff like that. But look, oh, wrong book. Where'd you go? There you are. But look at how much just like brown grunge there is, right? Brown grunge. So there's the lightning underneath, and then there's just a brown mucky grunge everywhere. And to me, it looks like effects you can get with ink. Let me see what I have. So I've got two different browns. I've got the Distress Oxide. Yes, I know. Tim Holtz, blah, blah, blah. But it's a great yellowish, tobacco-y, cancer-y brown color, if that makes any sense. Where this is just brown. This is kind of a one-dimensional color. But these Distress Oxides tend to have lots of undertones to them that I really like. And so this one's got kind of a yellowish, sickly kind of undertone that I really like. So, again, we are going to take our guinea pig and we are going to, let me get another paper towel. So I definitely need to blot some of this off. I have a bigger brush than this one too. Where is it? I bought these makeup brushes. I thought useless as makeup brushes, but fantastic for spreading around pigment. There we go. There's the bigger one. Let's try this one. Oh, yeah. That's a nice soft. Okay. Let's do this. Oh, look at that grunge. Can you see it? Can you see it? I hope you can see it. It's giving me just the perfect amount of gross grunge. Age, dirt, people's hands have been all up in this. I thought about doing this in paint, but I thought, man, the paint's gonna be way too opaque. I needed something transparent, and this ink is perfectly transparent for this. Can you see it? Can you see it? I'm gonna put some right on the gutter. Let's dirty that up too. Of course, some of the paint is still slightly tacky, so it's really grabbing the ink, which is great. And really kind of mixing with it a little bit. Oh, so grungy and gross. I love it. I'm like an old, often handled book. That's it. That's the look I want right there. Do you see it? Well, now you can't see it because I moved it. Let me move the whole thing, actually. Oh, I'm so excited, y'all. Look at how beautifully dirty and old and worn that looks now. And you could take some sandpaper to your book cover and wear the corners if you wanted to, wear down to the cardboard. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess with the structural integrity of the book. I just want to make it look worn. I don't want it to actually be worn. And, you know, kind of banged up. And I'm probably going to put book corners on it, which is why I'm not paying too much attention to the corners. I have some rub and buff somewhere. I just found it too. All right, and then I'm just going to not gild, but silver leaf in a way. And so it's kind of the same thing. I don't fill my sponge up, and I just kind of swipe it on so it looks kind of old and worn. And like it could stand to be redone. I guess I put a crap ton. You never need okay, this is the opposite of paint. Paint, mix more than you think. Rub and buff, grab the smallest amount possible and then cut that in half. It's never as much as you think you're gonna need. Alright, and then you just kind of buff this up to a shine. And let her dry. Should I do that frame too? Guess I'm doing it. See? So if there's areas you don't like, cover them up. Just paint over them. Fix it. You can do whatever you want. This is yours, baby. What do you think? Do you like the silver? I think I like it. I think I do. Alright, so I'm going to set these aside, let them fully dry, and set up. You know, I could splatter things on it. I might go back over to a little bit more ink because the silver looks a little too clean, right? So I could ink these edges up again. They could stand to be dirtied up again. So I think I'll do that. And then a layer of clear coat of some sort. And then the case is done. So, yeah. So I will see you in the next video, and we're going to decide where we're going from there. As always, I forget to say this, but, you know, like, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff. But here's a close-up of some of the grunge and stuff that we've done so far. So, yeah. So I'm just going to dirty that silver up a little bit. All right. Thanks. See ya.